And then they came up with things that people say, and then we matched captions to the comics. Yeah, it's like reading an Ivan Brunetti comic or something, right? It's like for those who know his humor. But that's why we laugh at those things, because they're really uncomfortable. And what I also liked about this exercise is that it didn't necessarily depend on anyone drawing, right? People could participate by coming up with captions or matching the right caption to various drawings for the best comedic effect. Hillary actually herself came in for a session and worked with when I started working at the set with the vets, and came in for a session, and she actually made a gag comic with the group, and she made a list of things that didn't seem to go together, and then the group generated a gag by finding a unifying thread. And this was the comic that came out of the session. The conversation was really lively, and then she actually ran the finished gag in her syndicated comic strip, and wrote a little note. The next exercise we did was more of a facilitated discussion that takes advantage of the iconic nature of Batman. Batman seems to be the poster child for PTSD. He had a traumatic experience as a young boy, and he exhibits obsessive, bizarre, he dresses in a batsuit for crying out loud, and continually violent behavior. He's also isolated himself. He lives in a cave, right? Although I'm just thinking now, like, he did join the Justice League, so it's not a perfect metaphor. But still, Bruce Wayne has a really hard time integrating the past with the present. And this is fundamentally what a cartoonist does when you think, right? When you think about how comics work, right? Specifically the way a panel functions, it's a discrete unit of time, right? Each panel is a discrete unit of time, and we're putting these discrete units of time together on a page so that on any given page, past, present, and future kind of come together to tell a story. So talking about Batmans with Vets, this insight into cartooning can help lay the groundwork for a more experienced facilitator or counselor to follow up on discussion or be a starting point of a cartooning studio project. Another superhero PTSD connection, of course, is the work of Jack Kirby, co-creator of the Hulk, Fantastic Four, Thor, X-Men, and the Avengers. And Jack was a World War II vet, and this is a quote from the writer and Kirby lover David Glenn Gould. Kirby shot and stabbed Nazis for about 6 months in 1943 and 1944. And I would argue that experience didn't just change his life, but shaped his work from that moment forward, in that an underlying PTS worldview took him places he wouldn't have gone otherwise. For instance, Kirby deepened the emotional realm of the Marvel Universe by the reintroduction of Captain America in the Avengers #4. So, just a little for people who aren't familiar with the Captain America myth, he was a character in the 40s, fought in World War II, superheroes weren't selling, he went away, the Marvel era rose in the early 60s, and then they introduced Captain America back by finding him in a block of ice. Like he died, he got shot off a plane in World War II, frozen in ice, and then the Avengers pulled him out and thawed him out. So back to the quote from David Gould, Avengers #4, with the introduction of Captain America, now had a hero with a truly nuanced, complex, unsolvable problem, post-traumatic stress disorder. Cap responded from his thaw by freaking out, flashing back, displaying hypervigilance, remorse, guilt, nightmares, delusions, the list goes on. And with that, the Marvel Universe was really born. Every character had to have an emotional layer like that from then on. And the world of Marvel was based on a trauma that Kirby suffered through. And I thought this was really fascinating, that this affliction of PTSD is really transformed, and this affliction is transformed into something so central to popular culture as like the billion-dollar Avengers movies and Marvel franchises has shown. Another exercise included that I've done with the vets, and I'm going to do this tomorrow, so I'm not going to talk about it too much, is I use comics as images as a guided discussion on ethics, this little thing called the Walmart dilemma. And another exercise where patients figure out what part of their stories is appropriate to share with what audience as well. So we take one narrative and we break it into bits, and when you're at a job interview, you don't start gushing about, your love life, perhaps. Anyway, so after presenting many exercises, the VA team was encouraging and connected me to the VA's recreational therapist, Brooke Robinson. Yes, that's her name. Hopefully that probably resonates for a lot of Baltimore people here. I said, do you know, we named after Brooke Robinson? Who? She's like, I've heard of him. All right, anyway, starting this past January, myself and other members of CCS community started visiting the residential recovery center. The vets dealing with the substance abuse issues, and then later the psychiatric ward, vets dealing with the PTSD issues, among other things. Having Brooke there, as we felt our way through this process, was essential. She helped calibrate our expectations and was a great resource as we began engaging with the vets. The first bump in the road, though, I mean, we had all these exercises, and we did many of them, but the first bump in the road occurred as we backed out of the driveway. We planned for the 6-week residential recovery session, but then we realized at the last minute that people, it was like a rotating thing, so not everybody started at the same time. So we couldn't build on skills week to week to week. So we had to kind of adjust. One thing we did, instead of doing it once a week for 6 weeks, we did it, twice a week. So at least we had consecutive sessions, which was a little bit better, but not great. So that changed it a little bit, because two is better than one. And the other thing, of course, is like you get a relationship. Some vets were there for 4 or 5 weeks, and when you walk in and you don't have to kind of win them over or build some trust with the vets, that was a huge thing I found. So this planned curriculum that we had soon became this week-to-week catch-as-catch-can feel to it. And, I've taught comics for many years, and, I had a lot of bag of tricks I could do. But not having that consecutive time certainly put a crimp in our plans. In the psych ward, many of the vets were highly medicated, but they were hungry for activity because they were literally locked in. So they liked homework. So you would give them, you would suggest homework, and they'd come back with piles of paper. One vet in the psych ward that I worked with suggested that comics could be part of his wellness recovery action plan, which I didn't know what it was. He explained it was I'm sure many of you in the audience do know what that is, but it's something that they do on a day-to-day to help maintain. And he found it, and he wanted to incorporate into that. And one studio project that I found effective and I wanted to explore further was inspired by a vet who introduced me to this thing called Zentangle. Has anybody heard of this? Zentangle? So there's these, it's like drawing these little structured, like these little 3x3 cards that you buy, and they're very expensive for 3x3 pieces of Bristol. But you start like drawing these little patterns, and it's very calming. And I've seen this with cartoonists as well, who do like intense cross-hatching in panels, and it's just a way of kind of like almost meditating in a sense. So he had this Zentangle thing, and I thought it was great. I saw it, but what I really liked were the little plastic sleeves that he put these Zentangle things in, which is basically Mylar with like with six little squares, and it was basically a comics grid, basically what it was. So I ordered a whole bunch of these plastic sleeves, and then I just cut my own 3x3 cards, and started making comic panels. And this was, I think, one of the more effective things we did, because what happened was like I don't even know where to start. I'm having racing thoughts. Okay, write that down. Racing thoughts. Some vets who, like I said, were very sluggish for whatever reason, you had to sit with and literally draw their, what's that? It's a tattoo. Draw their tattoo. And then we just started taking these little panels and putting them in this basically this little grid, this little plastic grid, and moving things around to start making a story. And again, this goes back to this idea of moving blocks of time around to make them more cohesive, and sometimes they were even quite poetic. But of course, I shouldn't say of course, but perhaps the most moving, if not effective, sessions were just when artists came in and just kind of shared their process and talked candidly about the trials they went through. I have a student at the Center for Cartoon Studies, Carlisle Robinson, another Robinson, and she was part of the CCS team that came to the VA and worked with the group, and everybody really took to him. Carlisle's deaf, and her work is about trying to build bridges between mainstream culture and deaf culture. The vets responded, very strongly to somebody with an obvious challenge who has not only faced it head-on, but draws inspiration but draws inspiration from what other people might consider a handicap to make the center of her work. Perhaps the most moving session was when the filmmaker Tara Ray, who shared a few scenes from her documentary Manhattan, Kansas. This was the story of Tara's return to Kansas to see her mentally ill mom. The last time Tara had seen her mom, when she was in her teens, her mom had threatened to kill her. She literally needed the camera to like have some shield between her and her mom, she described it. And she was very nervous to show the work, and when she sat down in a group, she told the group, like, this is the, and she screened this movie all over the country and the world, and she told the group this is the first time that she's ever screened the movie sober. So she is in recovery herself. And then Tara showed this photo book she's putting together about a recent return to Kansas to visit her grandmother. She talked about how important the arrangement and size of panels in the book was to telling a story, which is kind of like what comics can also help teach. And Tara is about like 5 feet tall, and it was really moving at the end of seeing these big burly vets at the end like walk up to her and hug her and tell her she was one of the bravest people they've ever met. That was pretty intense. So in wrapping up here, CCS's time at the VA certainly supported my belief that comics are an amazing and effective therapeutic tool. And no, this is a bad analogy to use in a medical conference, but I feel like comics are like a therapeutic blowtorch, and so far we've only lit a few cigarettes with them. But where to go from here? You know, like this is what I'm figuring out, and this is why I was so excited to attend this conference and get inspiration and talk to everybody. You know, does it make sense to seek out a more formal collaboration between CCS and a program that is training therapists? How can the comics work we are doing complement existing therapeutic models and treatments? How can CCS best take advantage of its own unique cartooning networks to reach out to veterans? As CCS continues to work at the White River Junction VA, how do we measure its effectiveness? Do we really need to measure its effectiveness? And as we hone workshops, how best do we share our findings? Can what we are doing in White River Junction, could this be effective throughout the country or implemented throughout the country? And can it be implemented without the facilitation of cartoonists? So these are all questions that I'm asking myself at this point. And you know, one thing I've worked going back to like using my own practice as a cartoonist as a touchstone, what I've learned is that you can only map out a story so much ahead of time. Most of the answers reveal themselves in the making of the work, and as we continue to work with the VA, these questions will undoubtedly be addressed. And as with most things, resources will determine how the project moves forward and at what speed. I'm also pleased to report that CCS was just notified that we received a small NEA grant to keep developing curriculum and create some comics that document this vet comic partnership. I recall something attributed to the writer Zadie Smith. At a reading, Zadie Smith was asked, "How do you find your voice as a writer?" And her response was that you should find someone else's voice. The idea of cartoonists trying to use their skills to help other people find their voice seems like a really noble endeavor to me. This fall, CCS is launching a new applied cartooning track. I've been working with a faculty member, Merrick Bennett, who's here. He drew this little image is his, where cartoonists can tackle projects in a variety of settings. Instead of working on the next great graphic novel, applied cartooning students may explore ways comics can help autistic children, or work with a company's R&D department to better generate, share ideas, working in issues of Common Core in the education, in the education field. One of my favorite little books is a book called Art and Fear by David Bales and Ted Orland. If you haven't seen this book, please check it out. I recommend it highly. And this quote speaks to this notion of applied cartooning. If art is about self, the widely accepted corollary, is that making art is about self-expression. And it is. But that is not necessarily all it is. It may only be a passing feature of our times that validating the sense of who you are is held up as the major source of the need to make art. What gets lost in that interpretation is an older sense, that art is something you do out in the world, or something you do about the world, or even something you do for the world. The need to make art may not stem solely from the need to express who you are, but from a need to complete a relationship with something outside yourself. As a maker of art, you are a custodian of issues larger than self. And this seems like a great guiding principle for applied cartooning. And this veteran cartoonist program is an example of what CCS calls applied cartooning. So I'm super grateful for this opportunity to give you this snapshot. I've been super inspired by all the ideas and everyone's generosity. And besides messing up my notes, thank you again, Lydia. Yeah. And anyway, and that's all I got. And it's 5 minutes after 5, so not too bad there. Thanks everybody.